1.21 gigawatts! Tom, how am I going to generate that kind of power?
With the climactic scene in Back to the Future, of course. 30 years ago, audiences stood up and cheered as Doc Brown and Marty McFly gained mastery over time, space, and the box office, launching one of the most beloved film franchises in history. But it took more than just fancy DeLorean driving to create director Robert Zemeckis' movie magic. So this week on Art of the Scene, we're gonna crank up the Huey Lewis and break down the Clock Tower climax. Back to the Future was inspired by screenwriter Bob Gale discovering his father's old yearbook and wondering if they would have been friends in high school. He decided, no, probably not. But he did thankfully get along with his buddy Robert Zemeckis well enough to team up and pen the script.
To write a screenplay like Back to the Future, it was just an immense amount of very hard, back-breaking work. I mean, there was nothing really fun about writing the screenplay. It was really hard.
Despite Columbia initially liking the script, they put it into turnaround in 1981 because it wasn't considered sexy enough. Teen-driven movies of the era were hyper-raunchy romps, think Porky's or Revenge of the Nerds.
Oh, pie.
In fact, for the next 4 years, every studio in town passed on the aw shucks innocence of Marty McFly for that reason. Except for Disney. Disney passed because they didn't think the reverse Oedipal complex of a mother falling in love with her son was appropriate. So how did all this change? Money. Since he couldn't get Back to the Future off the ground, Zemeckis took a different directing assignment that became the Michael Douglas action-adventure Romancing the Stone, which was a hit. With this wind in his sails, Zemeckis approached Spielberg to produce Back to the Future, and with that juice, they were able to set the movie up at Universal. Once at Universal, the movie production was a cakewalk and there were no problems whatsoever. Only except that they weren't shooting the movie with Michael J. Fox. Fox was Zemeckis' first choice, but the producer of Family Ties wouldn't let Fox leave work to shoot the movie because Fox's co-star, Meredith Baxter, was on maternity leave. And without Fox or Baxter, he would be out a bunch of series regulars. So Zemeckis moved ahead with his second choice, Eric Stoltz. After shooting for 4 weeks, Zemeckis and Gale had an awful realization.
He's a magnificent actor, but his comedy sensibilities were very different than what I had written with Bob. And he and I just never were able to make that work.
Stoltz recognized this as well, admitting to friend and director Peter Bogdanovich that he was unsure of Zemeckis' direction and thought he was miscast. Zemeckis explained the dilemma to Spielberg, and they all decided to amicably part ways with Eric. And now they were able to cast Fox, since his Family Ties co-star was back from leave, even though the reshoots would add $3 million to the budget. But Fox would have to do it when Family Ties didn't need him, which was at night. Fox had to shoot Family Ties during the days, and then would drive straight from taping Ties to the Back to the Future set. Film from 6:30 to around 3 a.m., sleep for 2 to 3 hours, and then repeat. Anything that needed to happen outdoors during daylight needed to be shot on weekends. In addition to Michael J. Fox, it also took its toll on Zemeckis, who said the result was him directing the movie half asleep, and was the fattest, most out of shape and sick I ever was. A very quick refresher on the plot just to bring you up to 88 miles an hour. The year is 1985. Marty McFly is friends with kooky scientist Doc Brown, who's invented a time machine built into a car. Marty hops in the time machine to escape some terrorists and is sent back to 1955 in the process, where he meets the younger version of his parents and disrupts their meeting, making it unlikely he'll ever be born. Now Marty must work to reunite them in order to ensure his existence, and he and Doc must figure out a way to harness the 1.21 gigawatts necessary to power the time machine to send Marty back to the future. Which brings us to the clock tower scene. Because as we all know, the famous Hill Valley Tower was struck by lightning at precisely 10:04 p.m., and apparently lightning bolts consist of 1.21 gigawatts worth of power. These are both obviously broad bits of movie logic, a subject we'll touch on in just a bit. The clock tower scenes were shot at Courthouse Square on the Universal Studios backlot. The clock tower was originally built for the 1948 film An Act of Murder, but had also been prominently featured in To Kill a Mockingbird, The Music Man, and even Gremlins. The rest of Courthouse Square was used for the downtown Hill Valley scenes, both the ones set in 1955 and the ones in 1985. These two time periods were one of the greatest challenges that faced production designer Lawrence Paul of Blade Runner and Escape from LA fame. In 1985, people didn't think of the 50s as a period yet, making it difficult to find the right props. Writer Bob Gale described the process thusly: "We decided to shoot all the 50s stuff first and make the town look real beautiful and wonderful. Then we would just totally trash it down, make it all bleak and ugly for the 1980s scenes." Sadly, in real life, it got totally trashed and bleakly ugly on June 1st, 2008, when a 3-alarm fire burned the surrounding set to the ground. Thankfully, the clock tower was spared.
Save the clock tower!
Perhaps the most remarkable part about the Back to the Future climax is how few visual effects were utilized. The original Star Wars in 1977 had 360 visual effects shots. By comparison, for 1985's Back to the Future, Industrial Light and Magic were tasked with creating only 32. Without relying on never-before-seen visuals, the heart-pounding excitement was the result of two sources: simple practical special effects and Zemeckis' expert directing.
Action!
The practical effects consisted of lightning, fire, and Doc Brown dangling off an edge. The lightning wasn't CGI because the computational abilities of the time weren't capable of what visual graphics artists called verisimilitude, which is a fancy word for the appearance of being real. So the lightning strike and power surge was added via hand-animated rotoscoping. Traditionally, this is done with an animator drawing a black line on clear acetate, then placing that over a photo enlargement of each frame. The acetates are then photographed, composited, then flipped negative to turn the dark black into blinding white, and then colored. The iconic flame trails left are Film Fire 101, as the special effects team would light a mixture of gas and pyro fluid. Unfortunately, the fires would often go out before they needed to start shooting. Special effects man Kevin Pike encountered a similar problem with the cold steam meant to waft off the time machine. They would spray the DeLorean down with liquid nitrogen, but it would frequently evaporate before it was time to shoot. This is why the car is icy in some shots from the beginning of filming and hardly at all at the end. They essentially gave up on the effect to save precious Michael J. Fox shooting time. Lastly, Doc Brown's precarious courthouse ledge stunt work was done by the inventor of the stunt airbag, Bob Yerkes, who was also a circus aerialist.
I ran away and joined the circus when I was 15, and then I come back in the winter and do stunts.
Film nerd Zemeckis used the scene to pay homage to the iconic and hilarious 1923 Harold Lloyd silent comedy Safety Last. Not to understate the production contributions of ILM or the stunt team, but it's Zemeckis who deserves the lion's share of the credit for making this climax so memorable, as he expertly established the aforementioned broad movie logic. So let's push in and see how he sets up the scene, which is really more of an 11-minute sequence. It opens with a long shot on the clock tower. The minute hand moving forward sets the scene in motion. We, the audience, know the time the lightning will strike, and there is now literally a ticking clock on screen, counting down the amount of time Marty has left to get back. Doc Brown steps into frame and proceeds to check multiple watches before turning toward camera, going bug-eyed and burning the lens, which is industry speak for looking directly at the camera. Unlike, say, Ferris Bueller, Doc doesn't break the fourth wall completely by speaking to the audience, but Zemeckis has clearly established the tone for the climax, over-the-top ridiculousness in which real-world logic doesn't fully apply, and we wouldn't want it to.
I had to change. I think I'm going back in that suit.
In fact, throughout the scene, anytime Zemeckis needs to have a beat hit or kick the momentum in the pants, he'll push for a tight shot on Doc Brown reacting like a madman, whether it's to the photo, or a gargoyle, or the cord coming unplugged. This, plus the gusting wind, the constant cutting on action, and Marty and Doc maniacally running back and forth, livens up what would have been a very dull expositional scene explaining the logistical details of time travel, details that Doc has already covered earlier in the movie. Of course, if everything went right, there would be no climax, hence the tree branch falling and knocking the cord free. This sets in motion a series of events where everything that can go wrong does. The ledge crumbles beneath Doc's feet, the DeLorean's engine cuts out, Doc plugs the loose end of the cord in only to have it come undone at the other end. The goal here is pure science fiction fantasy, but all the obstacles are easily relatable to a normal human.
Please, come on.
This avalanche of unfortunate events would elicit eye rolls of the "aw, come on, really?" variety. Except that Zemeckis has already expertly established the broad, jocular tone of the movie. By now, it makes sense to the audience that a stopped car could only be restarted with the frustrated bump of a forehead against a steering wheel. It's not because of electricity or due to wonky auto mechanics, it's because, of course, only the funniest, most satisfying storytelling choice would work. This is why Back to the Future's dozens, if not hundreds of logical and anachronistic errors throughout the film go overlooked, at least the first time you view it. Nobody cares that Doc is wearing Velcro shoes when he's hanging from the clock tower, even though Velcro shoes didn't get popular until the 1980s. What matters is that both comedic and action momentum is maintained to keep the audience racing forward and focused on the details that matter to the story, not the nitpicky ones that the logical side of your brain would spurn. Which is why, in retrospect, it was so critical for Zemeckis to make the decision to cut Stoltz free and bravely ask for an extra $3 million to reshoot with Fox. As a director, he knew that if he didn't have the right actor to land his jokes and establish the tone, he'd never get the audience to come along for the ride from the past all the way back to the future. It's a reminder that truly top-notch directing is more than just assembling your shots. It's about establishing tone and characterization from the very get-go and maintaining it through your climax. Few movies more meticulously plant and pay off story beats better than Back to the Future. But the most important seeding Zemeckis did was going back in time to start over with the Marty McFly he always wanted, so we would still love this movie in the future. Hey guys, thanks for watching Art of the Scene on Back to the Future. This is one of the Cinefix family's favorite movies. If you have a scene that you think is iconic, that you'd love to see us break down in more detail, let us know in the comments below. Otherwise, click like, click subscribe if you haven't already, and come back next time for more awesome movie content right here on Cinefix.